She had exactly 22 hours left. 22 hours to find a husband or lose the only person in this world who still called her family. And if you think that sounds like the beginning of something impossible, wait until you hear what a stranger said to her in the hallway of a county courthouse. He looked her straight in the eye and said, "Then you'll have to come live at my place and be their mom." This is a story about two people who were drowning in separate oceans and somehow washed up on the same shore. Stay until the very end, because the moment that changes everything is the moment neither of them expected. Elena Vasquez was standing in the parking lot of the Monroe County Courthouse in rural Tennessee when the trembling started. It began in her fingers and worked its way inward, through her wrists, up her arms, settling deep in her chest like something alive and afraid. In her hand was a letter, a single page, typed on official court stationery, with a judge's signature at the bottom in blue ink. The words on that page were polite, professional, measured, and they were destroying her life one sentence at a time. The letter informed her that the temporary custody arrangement for her niece, a 7-year-old girl named Sophie, was under final review. It informed her that the court had identified ongoing concerns regarding household stability, financial security, and the absence of a second legal guardian. It informed her that if these concerns were not addressed by 5 o'clock the following afternoon, Friday, October 27th, permanent custody of Sophie would be transferred to the state of Tennessee for placement in foster care. Elena read the letter 3 times. Each time the words meant the same thing. She was going to lose Sophie. Not because she had done anything wrong, not because she had failed, but because she was alone, because she was unmarried. Because in the eyes of the court, one woman loving a child with everything she had was not enough. The wind picked up and cut through her jacket, and she did not feel it. She could not feel anything except the paper in her hands, and the weight of a clock that had already started counting down. The story of how Elena ended up in that parking lot started 14 months earlier on a rain-soaked highway outside Knoxville. Her older sister Maria was driving home from work. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday. Maria was 34 years old. She was a dental hygienist who wore bright pink scrubs and kept a photograph of Sophie taped to her locker at the clinic. She drove a blue Honda Civic with a car seat in the back, a strawberry air freshener hanging from the mirror, and a bumper sticker that read, "Girl Mom." She was 7 minutes from home when a delivery truck hydroplaned across the center line. The police officer who came to Elena's apartment that night in Nashville held his hat in both hands and could not look her in the eye. Maria was gone. Just like that. A Tuesday, a rainstorm, and the world rearranged itself without asking permission. Sophie had no father listed on her birth certificate. Their parents were both gone, their father to a heart attack, their mother to cancer years before. There were no grandparents, no aunts or uncles with spare rooms and open arms. There was only Elena, 28 years old, working as a hostess at a restaurant in downtown Nashville, living in a studio apartment with a window that faced a brick wall. She was nobody's idea of a guardian. She knew that. The court knew that. But when she drove to Knoxville and walked into Maria's house and found Sophie sitting on the stairs, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, staring at the front door like her mother might walk through it at any moment, Elena made a decision that required no thought at all. She knelt down on the hardwood floor and gathered that small, shaking body into her arms and whispered, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She quit her job the next week, broke her lease, moved into Maria's house and stepped into a life that was not hers but became hers through sheer force of love. She learned that Sophie liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, never straight. She learned that Sophie was afraid of ceiling fans because of the sound they made in the dark. She learned that every single night, without exception, Sophie pressed her lips to a framed photograph of Maria on the nightstand and whispered, "Good night, Mommy. I love you to the moon." 11 months Elena held that life together with both hands. 11 months of scraping by on temporary work, cleaning houses, waitressing on weekends, selling Maria's things piece by piece to keep the electricity on. 11 months of social worker visits and court hearings and paperwork that asked the same questions over and over. Are you married? Do you have a partner? Is there a second guardian in the home? No, no. And each no was a nail in a coffin Alina could feel being built around her. The social worker was kind about it. She sat across from Elena in an office with fluorescent lights and explained that the county preferred 2 parent households for permanent placement. She said she was sorry. She looked at the drawings Sophie had made, pictures of Elena and Sophie holding hands under a yellow sun, with "Me and Auntie Lina" written in wobbly purple crayon, and she pressed her lips together and she said she was sorry again. Being sorry did not change the outcome. The final hearing was scheduled. The judge's letter arrived, and now Elena stood in a parking lot with 22 hours and a requirement that might as well have asked her to pull the moon out of the sky. She went inside the courthouse because she had nowhere else to go. The building was old, all dark wood and high ceilings, and the smell of floor polish layered over decades of anxiety and paperwork. She found the records office and stood at the counter filling out forms she did not fully understand, requesting an extension she had already been told did not exist. The clerk behind the counter was a heavyset woman named Doris with reading glasses on a beaded chain and hands that moved slowly and carefully across every document. Doris looked at Elena's paperwork. Then she looked at Elena's face. Then she set down her pen and said quietly, "Honey, you don't look okay." And Elena, who had spent 11 months saying she was fine, who had perfected the art of smiling while everything inside her was collapsing, opened her mouth to say that familiar word and found that it would not come. What came instead was the truth. All of it. The accident. Sophie. The hearings. The letter. The deadline. The impossible, absurd, heartbreaking requirement that she produce a husband out of thin air before 5 o'clock tomorrow. She told it all to a stranger behind a counter in a courthouse, and when she finished, she was not crying because she had gone past crying into some dry and hollow place beyond it. Doris listened to every word without interrupting. Then she took off her reading glasses and placed them carefully on the counter and said, "You wait right here. Don't move." She disappeared through a door. 3 minutes passed. 5. Elena stood perfectly still, her hands flat on the counter, staring at nothing. Then the door opened again and Doris came back. She was not alone. The man behind her was tall, broad-shouldered. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that were tanned and scratched from physical work. His boots were scuffed and heavy with dried mud. His hair was dark and slightly too long, curling at the collar, and his face carried the kind of exhaustion that sleep alone cannot fix. He had brown eyes, deep set and serious, and in one hand he held a manila folder stuffed with documents, and in the other he held a children's sippy cup with a smiling green dinosaur printed on the side. That detail, the dinosaur sippy cup in the rough hand of a man who looked like he had not slept properly in months, did something to Elena's chest. Something small and unexpected and sharp. His name was Daniel Morrow. He was 38. He worked at a lumberyard 6 days a week starting at dawn, and he had 2 children. Oliver was 5. Lily was 3. Their mother, Daniel's ex-wife Catherine, had left 18 months ago. She had packed a suitcase during daycare hours, left a note on the kitchen table that said only, "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore," and driven away in the car he was still making payments on. She did not call. She did not come back. She signed away custody during the divorce proceedings without contesting a single term. And the completeness of her departure was somehow worse than a fight would have been, because a fight would have meant she cared enough to argue. Daniel had been raising Oliver and Lily alone ever since. Alone meant waking at 4:30 to pack lunches before his shift. Alone meant begging a neighbor to watch the kids when one of them ran a fever and daycare would not take them. Alone meant sitting on the edge of Oliver's bed at night, while his son asked in a small and steady voice, "Daddy, are you going to leave too?" Alone meant carrying a dinosaur sippy cup into a courthouse because there was nobody at home to hand it to. He had come to the courthouse that day to file for subsidized child care assistance because the daycare fees were consuming nearly half his income, and without daycare he could not work, and without work he could not. The house and the math of survival had finally become a problem he could not solve with longer hours and less sleep. Doris introduced them simply. Daniel, this is Elena. Elena, Daniel. I think you two should talk. Then she stepped back and left them standing on opposite sides of a laminate counter, two strangers carrying the kind of weight that bends people at the spine. Elena spoke first because the silence felt dangerous. She said, I need a husband by tomorrow. The words hung in the air like something fragile and absurd. She expected him to laugh. She expected confusion, discomfort, the polite retreat of a man backing away from a stranger who had clearly lost her grip on reality. But Daniel did not laugh. He did not retreat. He looked at her with those tired brown eyes and said, Tell me why. So she told him. And he listened the way people listen when they recognize the shape of their own suffering in someone else's story. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He turned the sippy cup over in his hand. The green dinosaur smiled its cheerful, impossible smile. Then he looked up and said words that would alter the course of both their lives. Then you'll have to come and live at my place and be their mom. Elena heard the words but could not immediately process them. They were too large, too sudden, too impossible and too real at the same time. She searched his face for irony, for humor, for any sign that this was a joke or a test or a momentary lapse of judgment. She found none of those things. What she found was a man who was completely serious. A man who had done the same desperate math she had done and arrived at the same terrifying answer. He continued, his voice low and steady, rough at the edges like sandpaper. I'm not pretending this is normal. I'm not pretending I have this figured out. But my kids need a mother. Not a babysitter. Not someone who shows up and leaves. They need someone who stays. Someone who is there in the morning when they wake up. Someone who sits at the table for dinner. Someone whose name they can call in the middle of the night when they're scared. He paused. And you need a husband to keep your niece. So maybe this is crazy, but maybe crazy is all we've got left. Elena felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, opening. Like a door she had sealed shut a long time ago because there was nothing on the other side worth looking at. She wanted to say yes. Every desperate, terrified, exhausted cell in her body wanted to say yes. But something held her back. A question she needed to ask before she could take even one step forward. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Daniel looked down at the sippy cup one more time. When he looked back up, his eyes were bright with something he was fighting hard to control, because last Tuesday Oliver drew a picture at kindergarten. Family portrait day. Every other kid drew mom, dad, brothers, sisters. Oliver drew me and him and Lily standing in front of our house. And next to the house he drew a blank space. Just an empty spot on the paper. And when his teacher asked who goes there, he said, That's where mom used to be. Daniel's voice broke on the last word. He cleared his throat and blinked hard and set his jaw. A 5-year-old boy drew an empty space where his mother should be. I can't fix that alone. I've tried. God knows I've tried. Elena closed her eyes. She stood in the hallway of the Monroe County Courthouse and felt the full weight of what was being asked of her settle onto her shoulders. This was not just a signature on a document. This was not a legal maneuver or a clever workaround. This was 3 children. Oliver, 5, afraid of being abandoned. Lily, 3, too young to understand why the world felt wrong. Sophie, 7, whispering goodnight to a photograph. 3 small hearts that had already been cracked by loss. And 2 adults who were being asked to hold those hearts together with hands that were shaking. She thought about Sophie. About the way Sophie reached for Elena's hand in parking lots without looking. The way she trusted that the hand would be there. About what would happen to that trust if Elena let her go. She thought about a little boy drawing an empty space on a piece of paper. She thought about a 3-year-old girl whose mother had walked away without looking back. She thought about Daniel Morrow and his flannel shirt and his tired eyes and his dinosaur sippy cup and the way his voice cracked when he talked about his son. She opened her eyes. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I need you to understand something. I won't pretend. If I walk into that house and those children look at me, I am not going to be an actress playing a role. I'm either in or I'm out. All the way. And if I'm in, I need you to be in too. Not just for the paperwork. For real." Daniel met her gaze and held it. "For real," he said. The words sat between them like a covenant. They drove to his house that evening. Elena followed Daniel's truck in her aging sedan down a 2-lane road that wound through tobacco fields and past farmhouses with tin roofs. The sun was setting and the sky was that particular shade of orange and purple that only exists in Tennessee in October. The kind of sky that looks like someone painted it specifically to remind you that beautiful things still happen in the middle of terrible ones. Daniel's house was small, white clapboard, a porch that sagged slightly on the left side, a yard with a tire swing hanging from an oak tree whose leaves had turned the color of copper. Toys were scattered across the porch, a plastic dump truck, a doll with tangled hair, a pair of rain boots sized for a child who could not yet tie her own shoes. Elena parked behind Daniel's truck and sat in her car for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, breathing. Then she got out and walked toward the front door and stepped into a life she had never imagined. The house smelled like macaroni and cheese and laundry detergent and something faintly sweet that she would later learn was the strawberry shampoo Lily insisted on using for everything, including washing her stuffed animals. The living room was cluttered in the specific way that only a house with small children can be cluttered, not dirty, but alive, overflowing with evidence of tiny people who touched everything and organized nothing. Oliver was sitting on the kitchen floor building a tower out of wooden blocks. Lily was on the couch, asleep with her thumb in her mouth and a blanket pulled over her legs. Oliver looked up when Daniel walked in. Then he looked past Daniel and saw Elena standing in the doorway, and his eyes went wide and cautious in the way of a child who has learned that new people sometimes mean new kinds of hurt. "Oliver," Daniel said gently, kneeling down to his son's level, "this is Elena. She's going to be staying with us for a while." Oliver looked at Elena. Then he looked at Daniel. Then he looked back at Elena. "Are you a babysitter?" he asked. Elena knelt down too, bringing herself to his eye level. She could see Catherine in his features, a softness around the mouth, a certain tilt of the head. But his eyes were Daniel's, brown and deep and watching everything. "No," Elena said. "I'm not a babysitter." "Then what are you?" Elena opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The honest answer was that she did not know. She was a stranger, an interloper, a woman making a desperate bargain with fate. But none of those words were meant for a 5-year-old boy sitting on a kitchen floor, looking up at her with eyes that had already seen too much leaving. "I'm someone who's going to be here in the morning," she said. Oliver considered this. Then he held out a wooden block. "You can help me build if you want," he said. Elena took the block. It was small and warm from his hand. She placed it carefully on top of his tower, and it held. It balanced. The tower did not fall, and something inside her, something that had been bracing for collapse, exhaled for the first time in months. The next morning was chaos. Pure, unfiltered, beautiful chaos. Elena woke at 5:30 on the couch where she had slept under a quilt that smelled like cedar, and found Lily standing 2 inches from her face, staring at her with enormous blue eyes. "Who are you?" Lily asked. "I'm Elena." "Do you have juice?" "I'll find some." That was how it began. Not with ceremony or declaration, but with juice. Elena found the kitchen, found the refrigerator, found a carton of apple juice, and poured it into the dinosaur sippy cup she had first seen in Daniel's hand at the courthouse. Lily took it without thanking her and wandered back to the couch, and Elena stood in the kitchen of a stranger's house at dawn and felt something she could not name. It was not happiness. Not yet. It was something earlier than happiness, something more tentative, a seed before it breaks the soil. Daniel came downstairs already dressed for work, his hair damp, moving with the hurried efficiency of a man who has timed every minute of his morning down to the second. He stopped when he saw Elena in the kitchen. For a moment they just looked at each other. Two people standing in the strange new architecture of a decision made in desperation. I called the courthouse, he said. "What can get the license this morning? I have a buddy who's ordained. He can do the ceremony at lunch." Elena nodded. Her stomach was tight. Her hands were steady. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They were married at 12:15 in the afternoon in Daniel's backyard, under the oak tree with the tire swing. Daniel's friend Ray performed the ceremony. Doris from the courthouse came as a witness, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she had brought specifically for the occasion. Oliver stood next to Daniel, holding his father's hand. Lily sat in the grass eating crackers. Sophie was not there yet. Elena had arranged for her neighbor to bring Sophie after school, after the paperwork was filed, after the new reality had been made official on paper. The ceremony took 4 minutes. The vows were standard. The kiss was brief and careful. The kiss of two people who were making a promise they intended to keep, but did not yet fully understand. When it was over, Daniel looked at Elena and she looked at him, and neither of them smiled because smiling would have been dishonest. What they did was nod. A small, quiet acknowledgement that said, "We are here, we are doing this, we will figure out the rest." The first week was hard. Not hard the way Elena had expected, not dramatic or explosive, but hard in the small grinding way that real life is hard when you are trying to merge two broken things into one functioning whole. Oliver watched Elena constantly, not with hostility, but with a vigilance that made her chest ache, the watchfulness of a child who was waiting to see if this person would stay or disappear like the last one. He tested her in small ways. He spilled his milk and watched her face to see if she would yell. She did not yell. She got a towel. He asked her to read him a bedtime story and then told her she was doing the voices wrong. She asked him to show her the right voices. He did. Lily was easier in some ways and harder in others. She accepted Elena's presence with the uncomplicated openness of a 3-year-old, climbing into her lap without invitation, showing her rocks and leaves and a dead beetle she had found on the porch. But at night Lily cried for a mother she could barely remember, and Elena sat on the edge of her tiny bed and rubbed her back and hummed a song she made up on the spot, because she did not know the songs Catherine used to sing. Daniel and Elena moved around each other like careful strangers, sharing a small space. They were polite. They were considerate. They divided tasks with the efficiency of coworkers on a project. He cooked breakfast. She packed lunches. He did bath time. She did bedtime stories. They did not touch except accidentally, a hand brushing a hand when passing a plate, a shoulder grazing a shoulder in the narrow hallway. Each accidental touch sent a small electric jolt through the silence between them, and neither of them acknowledged it. Sophie arrived on the second day. Elena drove to pick her up from the neighbor's house, and when Sophie climbed into the car and saw Elena's face, she said, "Auntie Lena, are we going to our house?" Elena took a breath. "We're going to our new house," she said. "A house with a tire swing and a boy named Oliver and a little girl named Lily." Sophie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Will you be there?" "Every single day," Elena said. "Promise." Sophie was cautious at first. She clung to Elena in the new house the way a sailor clings to a mast in a storm. She did not speak to Daniel for 3 days. She watched Oliver with suspicion and Lily with curiosity. But on the 4th night, when Oliver was building one of his block towers in the living room, Sophie sat down across from him and silently began handing him blocks. Oliver looked at her. She looked at him. No words were exchanged. The tower grew taller. It was the beginning of something neither child had language for, but both of them needed. And Elena, watching from the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands, felt the first real crack in the wall she had built around her heart. The tensions came, as tensions always do, in the 3rd week. Oliver had a meltdown at school because another child asked about his mother, and he did not know what to say. He came home furious and screaming and threw his backpack at the wall, and when Elena tried to comfort him, he shouted, "You're not my mom. You're not my mom. You're not my mom," with such force that the words seemed to bruise the air. Elena did not flinch. She did not cry, not in front of him. She knelt down and said, "You're right. I'm not your mom. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Oliver stared at her, panting, his small chest heaving. Then he crumpled. He just folded in on himself like a paper crane crushed in a fist, and Alina caught him and held him while he sobbed into her shoulder, and Daniel stood in the hallway watching with a look on his face that contained every emotion a human being is capable of feeling simultaneously. That night, after the children were asleep, Daniel and Alina sat on the porch in the dark. The oak tree creaked in the wind. The tire swing moved slowly back and forth like a pendulum measuring something neither of them could see. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "For what he said." "Don't be sorry. He's right. I'm not his mom. You're more of a mother than Catherine ever was in the last year she was here." The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Elena felt the ripples move through her. She wanted to reach for his hand. She did not reach for his hand. They sat in the dark and listened to the wind, and the distance between them was measured in inches and miles simultaneously. The turning point came on a Sunday morning, 5 weeks after Elena had moved in. She was in the kitchen making pancakes, something she had started doing every Sunday because Oliver had mentioned once that his mom used to make pancakes on Sundays, and the look on his face when he said it was something Elena could not bear to leave unanswered. Lily was sitting on the counter, which she was not supposed to do, but which Elena allowed because choosing battles was a skill she had learned rapidly. Sophie was at the table drawing with crayons. Oliver was still asleep. Elena was flipping a pancake when Lily reached out and touched her hair. Elena looked at her. Lily's blue eyes were serious and searching. "Elena," she said. "Yes, sweetheart." Lily was quiet for a moment. She twisted a strand of Elena's hair around her tiny finger. Then she said, in a voice so small it was almost not a voice at all, "Can I call you Mama?" The spatula stopped mid-air. The pancake burned. Elena did not notice. She looked at this 3-year-old girl with tangled morning hair and strawberry shampoo skin and eyes the color of a sky that has just finished raining, and she felt something break open inside her that she would never be able to close again. She set down the spatula. She gathered Lily into her arms. "Yes," she whispered. "You can call me Mama." Lily put her head on Elena's shoulder and sighed the way children sigh when they have finally found the thing they were looking for. From the kitchen doorway came a sound. Elena looked up. Daniel was standing there. He was still in his sleep shirt, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed. He had heard everything. He was crying, not sobbing, just standing there with tears running silently down his face and an expression that said he was witnessing something holy. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and in that look, in that single unguarded moment, the arrangement became something else entirely. The contract dissolved. The transaction evaporated. What remained was real and raw and terrifying and more genuine than anything either of them had ever felt. Elena saw it in his eyes. He saw it in hers. Neither of them said a word. They did not need to. Some truths are too large for language. They can only be felt, the way you feel sunlight, the way you feel gravity, the way you feel the exact moment when falling becomes flying. That evening Daniel put the children to bed and came downstairs and found Elena on the porch. He sat down next to her, closer than before, close enough that their shoulders touched and neither of them moved away. "Elena," he said. "Wes, I didn't expect this. I know. When I asked you to come here, I thought it would be an arrangement, a practical thing. 2 people helping each other survive. I know. It's not that anymore. I know." He turned to look at her. The porch light caught the lines around his eyes, and the stubble on his jaw, and the vulnerability he wore, like something he had just taken out of a locked box and did not know how to hold. "I am falling in love with you," he said. "And it scares me more than anything has ever scared me in my life." Elena looked at this man. This tired, brave, broken, beautiful man who carried dinosaur sippy cups and built block towers and cried silently in kitchen doorways. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, as though they had been waiting for exactly this, as though his hand had been practicing for the shape of her hand without knowing it. "It scares me too," she said. "But I'm not leaving." He exhaled, a long shuddering breath that seemed to release something he had been carrying since the day Catherine drove away. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, and the gesture was so tender, so achingly gentle, that Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks, and did not wipe them away. They sat on the porch holding hands while the oak tree whispered above them, and the tire swing swayed in the darkness, and somewhere inside the house 3 children slept peacefully in a home that finally felt like a home. 6 months later, Elena officially adopted Oliver and Lily. Daniel officially adopted Sophie. The paperwork was filed at the same courthouse where they had met, at the same counter where Doris had introduced them, and Doris cried so hard she had to excuse herself twice. Oliver no longer drew empty spaces in his family portraits. He drew 5 people now, standing in front of a white house with an oak tree, everyone holding hands, everyone smiling. Sophie still whispered goodnight to Maria's photograph every evening, but now after she kissed the photo, she would turn to Elena and say, "Good night, Mama." And Elena would say, "Good night, sweet girl, I love you to the moon," because some promises are inherited and some love is big enough to hold both the living and the gone. And Daniel, who had once stood in a courthouse holding a sippy cup and a folder full of desperation, now stood in his kitchen every Sunday morning watching Elena make pancakes with Lily on her hip and Sophie setting the table and Oliver sneaking blueberries from the bowl. And he would lean against the doorframe and close his eyes and breathe in the smell of batter and strawberry shampoo and coffee and belonging. He had not known that this was what he was looking for. Neither had she. But fate is a strange and stubborn architect. It does not build the house you design. It builds the house you need. And sometimes, when you are brave enough to walk through the door, you find that everything you lost was waiting for you on the other side, wearing a new face, calling you by a new name, loving you in a language you did not know you already understood. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love finds a way. That families are not only built by blood, but by courage. That sometimes the most impossible beginnings lead to the most beautiful lives. And that no one, not a single soul on this earth, is ever too broken to belong.